Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast with me, Graham Reed, and Antonia Landy. Welcome, Antonia. Welcome back again, Antonia, for the second time today. How are you?
I am still wonderful, Graham. Thank you for asking.
Today we are joined by Amy Rohan, Product Ops Director at Vista. Amy, lovely to have you on the show. We've tried a couple of times to get this recorded now, a couple of little technical problems, so really great to finally be talking.
Awesome. I'm so happy to be here. Glad we could finally make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, tell us about yourself. Tell us how you got into Product Ops and your story.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. So, my background actually started in product management. So, I've worked at three different companies over the course of my career. I started off at Discover Card, which actually just got acquired by Capital One, but that's a US based credit card company. And that's where I fell in love with product management, specifically customer facing website mobile app experiences. And so I worked there for several years and then decided I wanted to try out a new industry. And I moved to United Airlines and worked in the airline industry for a bit, which is a super fun, fast paced, exciting place to work. There, I was also in product management, focusing on the Mileage Plus account experience for several years. And then most recently, I'm currently at Vistaprint. We are a global e-commerce company that specializes in custom marketing and design materials for small businesses. And Vistaprint is where I officially made the switch to product operations. So it was something that, quite honestly, I found myself thinking about product ops types of things a lot when I was in my product management role, especially as I started to manage other product managers. I started finding myself thinking a lot more just about the overall system and how are we working and this could be more efficient, but it's sometimes hard to influence that when you're just on a single vertical or working in a specific space. At Vistaprint, started having some of those conversations with my leaders around, one, this is a path I'm interested in, but two, I think it's something that could really benefit our company. And there was already some early stages of people doing various pieces of this in the company. And so it was more about formalizing it, bringing it together. And so I've been at Vistaprint for just about 4 years now. And I've been specifically in the product ops space for 3 of those years. So my role currently is Director of Product Experience Operations, and that actually encompasses both product ops and design ops. And so we're a single team within the organization. So that was my path and how I found my way to the product ops space.
Fabulous. I absolutely love hearing about everybody's journey, everybody's own unique journey into product operations. It's certainly familiar to me. I come from a product management background as well, so really interesting to hear. Also, really interesting to hear you that it's you kind of leading design ops as well, and I absolutely love to dive into that a little bit later on as well. So something we always do on this podcast as we invite our guests on is quite often we ask the guests to kind of bring their topic to the fold, what they want to talk about. You have the platform, Amy. What is it you've brought to the conversation today?
Yeah. So the topic I want to talk about is, as a product ops leader, how can you navigate your strengths and gaps? And the reason that this has been on my mind recently is I participated in a leadership cohort at Vistaprint. So just like most large companies, there's like various leadership development courses you can participate in. And one of the first things we did as a part of that course was took a DISC assessment. So that's another type of personality assessment that you can take. There's a ton of these out there, right? So I've taken like several throughout my career. You probably have taken some. They all have like slightly different methodology, but it ends up telling you where your strengths tend to be or the work you tend to enjoy more than other types of work. And so did the DISC assessment, and it was interesting to do another one of these, but also do it in my current role and after I've been in this role for several years, and kind of think about my strengths and areas that I'm perhaps not as strong in, and reflect back on the last years in product ops to think about like, I could totally see how some of this manifested in that experience, or like even thinking of the year ahead that we've got in terms of plans for our team and some of the things we need to tackle. It's so important for me to be mindful of my strengths and things I need to navigate so that I can be an effective leader and be effective in this role. So figured that might be interesting for some people to also think about. And we can kind of dissect this a little bit and think about it through the lens specifically of some of the, most common things that we as product ops folks typically encounter.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to say that I love the topic you brought to this round so much because I've also, like, having been a PM in the past and in my product ops roles, that's also something I've often looked at. And I actually got all of my team to do their, what's it called, 15 personalities. Those are 16 personalities assessment so that we could actually talk about, our strengths and weaknesses. And I think this is also something when you think of hiring, you want to make sure that you have diversity of thought in that way, that some people are really good at big picture thinking or really good at getting that buy-in from people, being amazing storytellers, but you also need people who are deep in the weeds, deep in the details, who actually enjoy getting into the nitty-gritty and executing on that vision. So I actually really, really love the topic anyway, but I'd also be really interested in seeing what unites us as product ops people, because I've long held the belief that being good at product ops is almost a personality trait. Like, the people who end up in this role tend to have very similar personalities.
Yes. So, something that I think you'll find funny then, I have my DISC assessment pulled up. And so I am a type C. And the DISC stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And so I am conscientiousness, which is analytical and reserved. But one of the statements from like the write up here is you tend to be systematic and you may enjoy creating standards that help bring about high quality outcomes. And so when I read that, I was like, well, if that doesn't sound like product ops, I don't know what does. But that's just one dimension of it. And, Antonia, I think you brought up a great point of like, part of the importance of knowing this stuff is, yes, if you have a team, it's really helpful to understand like the different strengths you have on the team. And, as you're thinking about building a team, balancing that out. I also think it's really interesting, even if you're a product ops team of one, if you can find a way to understand the different personality types of the leaders you're working with, things start to get really interesting because then you can really unlock a lot of value in how you communicate with them, how you go about change management, things like that. But yeah, I'm curious if either of you have ever done any of these tests, if you've had any reactions to it, like what have you found in your past experience?
I've certainly done a number of these tests over the years. Can I remember exactly what the results were? I remember one years ago, which was kind of it was like a color scale assessment sort of thing, and I was firmly, unlike most of my colleagues, which was very interesting actually. I was I was where was I? I was part of a training team, and everybody else that was part of this course was all very, very sales focused, and I wasn't. So they were coming out as I think they were very red and very yellow, kind of positively, but kind of in the aggressive kind of stance. Whereas blue, where I was very, very analytical, very logical, very systematic in approach. And so absolutely, I can see that's where I sit in that respect.
Yeah, I've done a number as well. I think for me, so I'm very firmly an ENTP, if that tells people anything. But I think I quite like Enneagram as well. So I'm a 7 wing 8. Which the thing about Enneagram, I don't think people use it very often, but it goes very deep on how you act when you're in your ideal state and how you act when you're stressed. And I think seeing those things fed back to me, A, they were pretty accurate, but B, sort of understanding also on a personal level, like, ooh, I think I might be burning out here, or ooh, I'm acting a bit harshly, or I'm a bit short with people. Like understanding those markers of I need to be mindful here has been really, really important. But actually, one that I love using, and it's almost a little bit tongue in cheek, but I do actually think it's really important, especially when it comes to change management, is, and this is gonna tell everybody in the world what kind of nerd I am, but the Dungeons and Dragons alignment chart.
Ooh, I
So
haven't done that one.
so it goes between like lawful and chaotic and good versus evil. It's very telling because I think I would consider myself a neutral good, and it's like I will do the right thing as long as I believe it is the right thing to do. And if there is something that I disagree with, I have a hard time following those orders, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. And taking that into a professional sense, when there is a change motion, for example, or when there is something that is maybe mandated top down, but I don't necessarily feel that is the right way to go for my teams, I have an issue with that.
And that's hard, right? Because in product ops roles, so often people are looking to us to gauge
Right.
what kind of change is this and like what's our reaction to it? Are we confident in this? Because if we're, showing that we maybe disagree or are not confident in it, then it's certainly going to be hard to get buy-in and ask, a bunch of teams to come along with us. So yeah, I think that was one of the biggest things I wanted to talk about was change management, because I think it's, your ability to portray, how you feel about the change, even if that conflicts with what you're feeling on the inside. Another theme for me, something that I have to be really mindful of, is some of my personality traits tend to favor consensus. And so, I am naturally in a happier state when those around me tend to agree, tend to be happy, and everyone's like, thumbs up, this feels good. If you've been in product ops, that is rarely ever the case. And especially, nearly all my experiences at like very large companies, like dozens of product teams. So when you're trying to influence a very large group of people to come along, it's very rare that like everyone is like, hooray, yes, let's do this huge change and come along with it. But uh, I have to know that, because I have to be comfortable with some of that disagreement, and also rely on my product sense too, to understand like, okay, this level of, pushback seems normal, but I think based on the evidence we have and, the work we've done to really understand the problem space here, like we should still move forward with this, versus I think we've actually run into like something that we need to address here, and we should pause and look at this. So that's something I have to really be mindful and navigate. And I even tell my teams like, um, if it seems, I need to be careful about like asking for permission for everything.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness versus permission. And so just let's be mindful of that as we're introducing change.
It's super, super interesting. And just to kind of roll back a couple of minutes to, I think Antonio, you said this about understanding a little bit more about what your teams are and
Mhm.
also your leaders are. And actually, that could be a really, really powerful thing. I'm aware that there is a lot of dispute about kind of a wide scale use of these personality tests and trying to kind of have strategy and actions based upon those. I think with all of these things, it's kind of taken with a little bit of pinch of salt. But actually, on the flip side, I really would love to get my whole team to kind of take these tests and kind of understand what all of their personalities based upon these scores actually are. Because just listening and just understanding from you both about the traits that you feel you have, your strengths, your weaknesses, and actually understanding a little bit about how you approach change, how they would approach change, would make such a difference in us in product operations and how we would approach that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it totally changes your team dynamics, how you approach different work. Um, it almost affects like your go-to-market strategy as a product ops person when you're introducing things, right? And so something else that I have to be aware of is like, Antonia, you or Graham, one of you mentioned being in the weeds and like in the details,
Mm.
right? And like we tend to be systems thinkers in product ops, right? So that's one of my strengths, is that like I can be talking about something and my mind immediately like pulls up the system map in my head. And even though we're talking about this one
Yes.
piece, like I'm seeing all the cogs turn. That's, I think, great for product ops. But as we're communicating with different folks in your organization or leaders, not everyone thinks that way, and not everyone cares to think that way. And so I could get in a room with people and start drawing diagrams and crazy lines, and like that's great for my mind. I will lose 70% of my audience because they just want to know what's in it for me, what does this mean for my teams, and like how is this going to benefit us at the end of the day. So like I really have to tailor back my communications because I could go crazy all day. So again, it's that mindfulness of it. It's nothing to feel like badly about yourself. It's just the mindfulness and going in and being intentional, with your communications and how you're interacting with folks around you.
Yeah, I love like that point specifically. I've had this conversation with so many of my coaches, right? This really harness your own systems thinking as a power that you have, as a superpower that you have, but then learn to pare it down and communicate what is essential at that point in time to the room you're speaking to. And I think this also goes into something that I've noticed with myself I started my tech career in quality assurance. It was a games testers first, and then I was testing software. So one of my strengths was that, oh, but have you thought about, oh, but what if? It's like, well, what if the user encounters an error here? What's the error message? What if they do this action that you didn't think about in your happy path? And I've taken that throughout my career. And even in product operations, when I think about, introducing a new process or a new tool or something, I'm usually the person that goes, but then how do we do this and this? But then how do we do that? Right? And that can be useful up to a point, right? And recognizing that point of just, we have enough value here to get it going and we'll figure out the rest as we go along.
Yes.
That is definitely something I have to be mindful of as well.
100%. I can relate to that very much. It's that need to anticipate,
Yes.
anything that could go wrong. And it comes from a good place. It's because you want it to be successful, but that's where you start to lose time, lose efficiency. And so, yeah, I'm constantly telling myself like, okay, done is better than perfect. Like we've reached enough confidence level that, this is viable to a viable solution to start out with. And we also talk a lot about two-way door decisions on our team. And so it's like, let's remind ourselves that this is a two-way door. If we try this and it doesn't work, we could walk back through that door and we have the power to change it. And so that helps me in those situations too, to stop like spinning my wheels and get off that train.
It's funny, actually. This is the third time in as many weeks, I think now, Antonio, we've talked about good enough. It was something we were talking about with Matt LeMay a couple of weeks ago about this whole good enough. Because just as you were telling your story then, Antonio, I was thinking, I used to do exactly the same thing. I used to get really down in the weeds of a new solution, a new tool we were putting out, and kind of trying to preempt the edge cases, as many edge cases
Right.
I possibly could. And how much time was I spending on that versus, do you know what? If it's helping 90% of the cases, and those edge cases, as they come up later, we can look at those, we can fix those. And do you know what? Some of them we might not be able to fix. It's never going to be a perfect solution. And it takes time to wean yourself off of that. If you are of that disposition, if it needs to be perfect, you need to think of all these things. It takes time, and I think, there's a few things I think we're talking about here for our watching or listening audience that, a lot of the things we're talking about here, like that make, good, better than perfect, and your different personality types. If you go and take one of those tests, and I would absolutely encourage you, if you're watching or listening, go and take one of the tests. Message us, tell us what you've got. It'd be really interesting conversation. But don't come away from this thinking that, okay, well, I'm in this category, so does that mean I'm either not good enough, I'm not a good product ops manager, etc., etc.? And it's not the case at all. Fundamentally, these tests show you that you are who you are. That doesn't mean to say that you still can't be successful in any career that you choose. One piece I'd like to just meander onto a little bit, because we've talked a lot about kind of how we can use this to deal with other people, or how knowing how other people are and work. Years ago, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, used to be a big thing. I don't think it's quite as much of a big thing anymore, which was all about kind of the study of how people communicate, how they interact. This was visual cues, this was how they spoke, this was words that they used, whether, if you heard them saying, I hear you versus I see you, this could tell you a lot about how they interact, and ergo you could train yourself to pick up on those things and respond in kind that would most get across to them. And I feel like this is an interesting track to kind of explore a little bit, in how knowing how people work and interact and communicate also helps you interact with them in a better way.
Yeah, and some of this, like I said, I think it's really helpful to identify some of those key leaders that you're going to have to partner with, whatever journey you're on within your company and really understand them. But it's also good to maybe, if you're working with a really large org, and sometimes these tests cost money and it's not possible to get like a readout on the entire org, you can still start to predict a little bit based on your interactions with folks and almost do a little bit of like, you know, developing personas for different groups that folks in the organization, you think may align to, whether that's like change acceptance or, some people tend to be like early adopters and are like, sure, you want to try something different? Sign me up. I'll be the guinea pig. Let's do it. Whereas others are a little bit more reluctant. And so I think it would be really interesting to try to understand, like, where do you think your org skews? Like in one of these tests,
Mm.
and then, what are some of the different pockets and how can you tap into those? And which ones do you possibly need to work a little bit harder to get on board for changes?
Yeah. And I think one of the dimensions in all of this, when we talk about communication, personality traits, and change, especially, is also culture and heritage and location. And I think, especially working with global teams, something that's really helped me a lot is the book, The Culture Map,
Yes.
and really understanding how people relate to things like hierarchy or to openly being disagreeable, right? And it comes all the way down to are we polite and disagree in private, or do we have challenging conversation out loud? And even in Europe, I remember, so my husband's British, and we first to move to Berlin. For the first week, he basically thought everybody at work hated him, just because the communication style in Germany, and especially in Berlin, it's very, very direct, very to the point, right? They don't shy away from telling things as they are, and they don't really couch things in flowery language necessarily. Whereas in Britain, it's everybody's very friendly, very polite. So
I don't know what
even
part of Britain he came from, but that's not the Britain I know.
we've got such different communication styles. And then looking at that in a global scale, in a global team, really understanding other people's attitudes towards communication and hierarchy can also go a really long way in making sure that the message lands.
I'm so glad you brought that point up because that is a huge factor in all of this, right? Your culture, there's even gender norms that play a role in this as well. And so, I mean, we could go layers and layers deep, but I think that again, it goes back to that mindfulness. And yeah, the culture map is a great book, or if there's like courses around that you can do, helps you feel much more prepared as you're going into different conversations and understanding people's communication styles. I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of this is, like you mentioned, how people communicate, how their demeanor is in certain meetings. And it can definitely be perceived the wrong way, but it's usually just goes back to cultural norms and what people are used to. And that was definitely a big learning curve for me. Vistaprint is the most globally diverse company I've ever worked for. We're a remote first company. And so we have folks all over the world. My past two companies were primarily US based. And so that is definitely something that if you are newer to working in that environment, it's worth investing the time to get to know, how different cultures operate and figuring out how you can build connections with different types of people because it really does play a big role in all of this too.
I think there's also some direct things with what we do in product operations as well here because absolutely everybody has their own culture, from a personality perspective. Actually, the businesses that they work in or offices that they work in, particularly if you're a big global organization, they will have a culture there as well. And then as a single business or single business unit, you're bringing all of that together. Now, a big part of what we do is we facilitate, we enable, we will quite often be chairing meetings. We will make sure meetings happen and things like that. And so part of that is going to be actually the success of that meetings, the success of those sessions is, well, actually, are we having the right kind of communication? Are we having the right conversations? Have we got some people that are, whether culturally or personality, have we got people that are very, very, boisterous, very, very again, positive, aggressive in what they're trying to put across, and others that are that much more timid? And have they got the space to communicate? Have they got the space to raise their ideas? And then how in product ops are we making sure that we are setting the right culture within all of these other spheres that we're all working within for our team, our meetings, etc., etc. I think that's super, super important.
Well, and it's so key, like you mentioned, to seek out some of those more passive voices and opinions because I think we've all probably experienced that there's always a few people who like are more than happy to share their opinion. They're the loudest voice in the room.
Me, hey,
Not that we would know anyone like that. And like I very much appreciate those people because sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get feedback. So I love when people are willing to share. However, you have to be really careful of over indexing on just those loud voices because we know that there may be someone else in that same room who's sitting there silently thinking, I couldn't disagree more. I don't feel that way at all. But for some reason, they may not be comfortable sharing. And so, our team tries to we try to connect with folks in different settings and have like more one-on-one conversations with some people because I find that you tend to get people are a little bit more comfortable in that versus like either a focus group or like a large group meeting that can intimidate some people. Making sure you have a well-balanced set of listening forums that allow those quieter voices to come in so it's well balanced at the end of the day really helps.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it also comes around to giving and receiving feedback and the style with which people are most comfortable with, whether that is written for some people, because they can really gather their thoughts, they can take time to respond or, articulate their thoughts in a manner that makes the most sense for them, whether that is one-on-one verbal, whether that is in a big group and that's your comfort level. I think having these different forums and these different avenues to solicit feedback and listening to the product organization is really, really important.
I couldn't agree more, both of what you've suggested there, that, we can, yes, absolutely, within that one setting that we will traditionally always go to, a live meeting, something like that, to be as inclusive as possible, to make space, make sure we're setting the right culture. But at the same time, we can't expect that everybody is still going to be comfortable. We can, regardless of what you set up around them. And so having those different mediums, those different settings, those different avenues for them to provide feedback and mixing them up, making sure that actually they know that all the different avenues are there. Despite, how I come across, I'm actually quite introverted at times. One thing I do find difficult is, if I'm basically, Amy, if I was on the other side of the fence and I was being asked a lot of questions, I need a lot of notes. I need my thoughts written down beforehand. If I'm ever interviewing, I do absolutely terribly at things like panel interviews, things like that, because I'm not good at those quick fire questions. I know the answers, but actually being able to combine everything in my head that quickly is very, very difficult for me. Much better at kind of what we're doing now, just having a chat and a conversation. So, and I think that's really, really important for all of the work that we do in facilitating the right conversations that we have is just make sure that everybody, as many people as possible, feels comfortable in sharing however they want, even if we have to have different settings. The gains way outweigh the cost of trying to set these things up.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Another topic that would be interesting maybe to dive into another day that I wonder about is just the nuance that we're navigating being a fully remote organization. Sometimes I do wonder what it would be like to do product ops or design ops in person or hybrid. Because I do find myself like you don't have those opportunities to like do the casual hallway chat of like, hey, how's it going? Like I heard this is going on, tell me about it. Or, see teams in action, doing like their team huddles or working through something. And so we do have to be a lot more intentional about making sure like we have those listening forums set up and making sure that we're visible and accessible to the organization too. But yeah, sometimes I also wonder like what's the nuance here navigating product ops in a fully remote role that's like almost a whole other can of worms we could get into here. But yeah, a lot of different factors play into all of this.
Yeah, I think one thing that I tend to also be mindful of in all of this is also people's past experience. especially people's past experience with change or transformation, or if applicable, people's past experience with product operations, right? Because this is something that I see a lot where product ops folks, because they're a team of one or because it's their first product ops engagement, take resistance very personally. And it's really easy to do that if you're the only person with that title and everybody is like, oh, I don't even know what product ops is supposed to be doing, right? Like it's very, very easy to take that personally. But I think what we also need to be mindful of, especially with these larger change motions, is everybody has some sort of transformation baggage. You know, everybody's gone through at least one failed transformation, and that can really burn people. Maybe like sometimes the resistance, it's not even about you. It's not even about what you are trying to enable or your current company. Maybe it's about something that happens to this person 2 companies ago, right? Made them retreat into their shell or made them just point blank refuse to change anything about how they do anything. And that is also, it's such a difficult interpersonal facet of managing change, but it's one that we need to be so deeply aware of.
Yeah, it can be a tough and lonely job in product ops, especially if you take that stuff on personally. It's like, "Ugh,
Mm.
like why isn't anybody listening or why is everyone, giving such a hard time?" And so you totally have to like disassociate you as a person from that feedback. I couldn't agree more with that. If you try to be a little bit more objective about it, I think that also helps you more successfully focus on like, okay, well, what's the underlying root cause here? Like you said, is it potentially just that, past experience maybe influencing someone, or maybe there's something else happening with this team or with the organization that is driving stress and we're just adding on to that at this point. And so is if you can remove yourself from the emotional part of like, this feels really hard or it's getting like kind of political, and just step out of that and, almost put your product manager hat on and try to understand what's the problem here, or what is the pain point that my customers are experiencing, and how can I go more into solution mode or understanding mode. Yeah, I do find myself reminding myself to do that because, we're passionate about making the lives of our teams better, right? And so we want that more than anything. But sometimes that, comes with its own challenges, and just making sure we're staying focused on that end goal at the end of the day.
And it is a challenge. So I think this is the key thing. And I think for any, I think for any kind of hiring managers or product leaders watching, I think this is a really, really key point. I remember being asked so many times, especially when I was interviewing for roles last year, always come back to, okay, well, how do you deal with somebody that is resistant to change? As if there's a magic answer to this. And there isn't. The reality is, or certainly my reality to this is that there is no magic answer. We need to work with those individuals, and it's an individual challenge to overcome. Let's say that for the moment. There is no magic. There is no magic playbook to kind of go, yeah, do you know what? If you follow this, change management becomes super easy and everyone will be on board every single time, because it's down to everything that we've said here. It's personality. It's both cultural. It's both history. It's both their own history. It's their own personalities that they've grown up with for years. It's probably, I always believe, the most difficult part of both our job and any part of any business is that change management, because you're dealing with everybody's individual emotions and personality. So to those people watching, I think, there isn't a magic bullet here. And to be honest, stop asking that question a little bit to your product ops people, because they will figure it out. It is basically, how do we go and figure these things out, and how do we work with these individuals? Antonio, we've talked about this a number of times before. I'd love
Yeah.
to get your take.
Yeah, and listen, product ops is a people job.
Yeah.
It's first and foremost a people job. And that's the thing. Like, I remember in the past, like burned out PMs would come to me and be like, product ops looks easier. Like, can I just do product ops instead of product management? And it's like, man, like the challenges are so different, because you're really diving deep into the culture of the organization, the aspirations of the organization, making sure that you can achieve those aspirations and those goals by taking all of those people on that journey with you. it's a people role first and foremost. And that makes it super, super rewarding, but it can make the challenges cut pretty deep as well.
Amy, how much have you been involved in kind of your product ops career in focusing on that culture, either of the business or your more direct kind of teams, product teams, tech teams, and whatnot?
Yeah, a lot of our early work has been on more foundational pieces of how do we operate at scale with such a large organization? What are some of those basic mechanisms we need in place to allow us to work efficiently? I would say now we are starting to turn the page a little bit and understand not only how we can be a more strategic partner to the organization, but also how can we start to drive more of that sense of community, I would say. So, like, when I think of culture, I think of like, do we have a strong sense of like product community or, UX community, or just like what's our culture around some of the new technology that, we're all talking about AI every day. And so are we on board with that? Are we skeptical about that? Are we willing to try? And some of that, product ops, I think, can play a role in that by one, kind of role modeling the change. So, like, we're trying to be early adopters of new technology and just show that you can try these things out, learn, iterate, and move forward. And we're also trying to kind of evangelize some of these things too, so that it becomes part of the culture. But culture is not something that product ops can solve alone. Like that, right? Like, that's the hard part of this, is that I think everyone expects all these big things. And I think we play a pivotal role in it, but it's so much bigger than that. I mean, there's so many things at play, whether it's like, the leadership and like what's our strategy as a company. Like, while I would love to say, again, we've got like the silver bullet for that, like it's such a big thing to tackle. So trying to focus on
Yeah.
like what we can actually influence in that space.
Yeah, I do. I mean, the way I've thought about culture and product operations, to me, it's always been, to me, culture is behaviors, right? And especially behaviors around trying and failing and learning and having that psychological safety, making sure that, yes, we strive for excellence, but we also take care of ourselves, right? We don't go into burnout to overwork just so that we are able to hit our goals. I think that's how we in product operations can, to a certain extent, set those standards or set those guardrails, if you will, those environments where that culture can thrive.
Yeah, we we are very rarely in the position of having, I don't want to say having kind of power to do all of this sort of stuff, but we are very rarely line managers of a vast number of people, where you tend to have a slightly more direct influence. This is the way we are going to work. My minions below me, so do it. Working on that, but you're absolutely right. Setting those good environments, setting good standards, coming out and saying, I'm going to show up this particular way. We're just about to, where I am at the moment, we're about to kick off in the next month or so some psychological safety training for our leaders, and myself included, within the product division. Because no shame about it, we probably don't know what good psychological safety looks like. And that's absolutely fine. But what we want to do is we want to know what good looks like with this training, and then be able to show up and go, yes, I'm practicing good psychological safety training for myself, and we are setting the right environments for you in our teams, in our division. And then we work on other bits and pieces from there. And I think that's an important thing that often gets overlooked is, leaders need to show up with the right way. We can't sit here and say, well, you are going to go and do X, Y, and Z. You're going to act in this way. You're going to follow these processes. And then our leaders don't, because not only are they setting bad examples, but actually then how do you work when you're so, you're grating against each other in terms of, how you're working and operating.
Yeah, that's really tough situation to be in. And I think what I've seen be most successful is that when product ops and leadership is really in lockstep, like we're telling the same story, we're walking the same walk, that's when you can really see transformational change. It's really hard to do that otherwise.
I think one piece I'd like to just finish on as well is kind of, we've talked a huge amount here about how personalities and behaviors and culture, from us impact on how we work and those around us on both how everybody else works. What about in kind of in terms of how you work with the systems, how you work with the tools, how you work with your process you want to have, almost the inanimate stuff. Does your personality lend itself to that at all? We kind of touched on it earlier a little bit, Antonio. You touched on it in terms of how detailed you are on your rollouts and things like that. But I'd love to dive into that a little bit more with you, Amy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's really the systems thinking. And, for that, I'm always looking to have like a balance, within both our team as like we're evaluating different, whether that's a tool or like a new way of doing something to make sure that like we're thinking of it holistically, right? Within balance, within reason of not, over analyzing every little thing. But I really always encourage our team members to, even though this may seem on the surface like something that is just for a UX designer, remember our teams are working in triads day to day. So they're working with their engineering counterpart and their product manager. And so something that we think may be isolated to just one role on the team rarely is. It usually has over reaching impacts to other people. So, think about that as we're building our solutions and include those folks' opinions as we're, making these different solutions. That's one thing that even though we may be dealing with something that is like a system, a tool, or process, it always goes back to talking to people. So, really encouraging our team as well to not be afraid to, reach out to folks to pick their brain on something. I think that's the other part that can be really hard about product ops. If you are intimidated by reaching out to folks, it's probably going to be hard because we're doing a lot of virtual door popping of like, hey, do you have 2 minutes? I want to show you something. I just want to pick your brain on this. And so having that personality, even if you're not like extroverted, like I would also consider myself more of an introvert, but I know how to push myself to do what needs to be done and turn it on a little bit. So yeah, I think it ties back to the systems thinking, but then also bringing it back to the people that it's designed for, because these things are there to serve us as people, not the other way around, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that another piece, and I find this as well where I am, is also finding that time when this is a very people focused role. And you want to bring them on the journey, you want to gain the consensus, you want to have those chats with them to gain their feedback. Actually finding the time to go and speak to all of them, not from our perspective, but trying to find their perspective. I quite often feel like, am I wasting your time? I don't want to interrupt your time. You've got potentially more important things to be focusing on, getting our products out the door, designing our products. Ultimately, what are we here for? I've always said, we're here to give them as much time as possible to build their products, to do their primary tasks. And if I'm then going and speaking to them regularly and going, oh, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? Am I taking away from that? And that's a piece that I'll be honest with you, I always struggle with. How do I go and justify to them? Can I steal 20 minutes to talk through this piece with you, whether it be in groups, on an individual basis? It is absolutely vital, but it is for me a personality barrier to constantly be getting over.
Oh,
I
that's
get
very
that.
interesting. Because
Yeah.
I feel like, Graham, honestly, like the best thing I have done in product ops is have regular one-on-ones. And I mean like weekly one-on-ones with people, 20 minutes in and out, 15 minutes. If there's nothing on the agenda, just have a quick check-in. But that regular interfacing with the people who are actually doing the work and go, how do you feel about this? Because that will give you much more real responses. Typically, if it's in a one-on-one setting and it's really, like I'm openly looking for free feedback. I want to know how this makes you feel. Does this make you feel uncomfortable? And why? Does this drive you up the wall? Do you not care because you haven't had the time to look at it? These are all things that I can take on as input and say, okay, this has now informed my way forward. So honest, and to any product ops person out there, like have regular one-on-one time with your people. It will meaningfully change how you see what you do.
Yeah. I've also found success in that. And I always think about it as like, those are my regular customer interviews, right? Like that's part of my continuous discovery. And one thing that I've recently started doing that has actually, I think, even improved like the quality of those conversations. I've told people that I want to structure it so that we, there's always time for them to bring whatever topic or questions, whatnot they have. But I want to leave the conversation hearing about highlights, lowlights, and at nights. And so highlights is, if it's been a few weeks since we last talked, like what's something good that's happened with you or your team, or what's something that it like seems to finally be clicking or working well. The lowlights, as you can imagine, is like what's not going well, or what's something that happened that like totally burned the team, and tell me about that. And then the at nights is what's keeping you up at night. So as we think about like the quarter ahead, what are you like, oh man, like I'm scared of this, or like this is going to be really rough for the team. And it's been working really well because, people can just naturally talk about like what's happened over the last, several weeks. And like the tidbits of feedback I can pick out are really, really interesting. So if you're looking for a way to structure those conversations so that you're not just hopping on the line and being like, so what's new?
What's up?
Yeah, what's up? I would definitely, give that a try. But Graham, I also totally relate to like, am I bothering you right now? Like I'm also from like the Midwest in the US, which like we're known for being like nice and like, we say sorry for everything. And like,
But don't get me wrong. I have these conversations with them, and I'm very
yeah,
like, well, you will tell me something that's
yeah,
going on. But it's certainly kind of from from an internal, that introverted perspective, it's
yes.
something that constantly kind of having to push myself. You'll laugh probably, you'll do these podcasts, stand up on stage and things like that. But something that I really, really struggle with. I struggle with on the telephone phoning somebody to ask for something. If I'm having a conversation with somebody that I already know, or they're asking me something, no problem. If I need to pick up and book an appointment for the dentist or the doctor or something like that, I really struggle to just get myself to go and do that. It's just a thing I've always had. But just coming back, I love, 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 love highlights, lowlights.
At
Sorry,
nights.
at night. Love it.
Nice.
That's brilliant, brilliant terminology. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been fun, and people kind of chuckle at it too when I tell them, because it's just kind of like a funny way to think about things. But yeah, it's going really well for getting feedback. And, at the end of the day too, like part of why I thought this would be an interesting topic is, as the three of us have been talking, we've each been a little vulnerable too, and sharing like, oh, like I really kind of struggle with this, or I'm actually pretty good at this. And if anything, I hope that there's someone listening that can relate to some of the things we've said and is like, that's okay. Like you can still be a leader in this space. You can still take on some of these big problems. Like none of us are perfect. And so like that's the other big takeaway I want people to have is like, if you do take one of these personality tests, like you mentioned this earlier, Graham, just because there's an area that it may not show you being as strong in, that doesn't mean that you are not capable of it. It just means to be mindful of that. It means that you may feel a bit more uncomfortable when you have to do work in that space, but as long as you're intentional about it, you can totally tackle those things. And so that's why I wanted this to specifically be about, navigating your strengths and your gaps as a leader, because you have to do both. And so if anything, I hope people take that away from this conversation.
I think that's an absolutely fantastic place to end. Antonio, I was just going to give you a chance. Is there anything you wanted to say to finish off on that point?
I just second everything Amy said, right? I think as with any framework or template or anything like that, right? The point of it is to spark a conversation. The point of it is to spark a thought, spark ideas, a little bit of introspection so that you can show up better going forward, and not just for other people, but for yourself as well. So I absolutely second everything you said, Amy, right? This isn't about saying, oh, you're good at this and you're bad at this and you will never be good at these things you are bad at, but it's just about being a little bit more intentional. But I also urge people so often, like we have such an insane feedback culture that I really want folks to think about their weaknesses a little bit less, honestly, and double down on your strengths, because those are the things that will set you apart from everybody else. Like if you double down on what you're already good at and you understand the space in which you can do that most successfully, you will have such a joyful experience.
I absolutely second all of that 100% what you just said there, in particular, Antonio. Look, own your weaknesses, own your strengths, but own your weaknesses. Despite everything I've said about being introverted, I'm very open about who I am, where my strengths and weaknesses are, and I'm fine with that. I know where I'm less good, even within product ops, and I like you say, double down on those strengths, but I asked for help with those weaknesses. I asked for assistance with those. I've got absolutely no problem going talking to my boss and go, do you know what? This isn't a strength of mine. So either that means it's probably take me a bit longer. I need to be a bit more prepared for something like this. Or do you know what? I could just use your help. You know, if we're putting something out the door, X, Y, and Z could really just do your help with this. Give it an eye over or something like before I put it out. In fact, I do that. You know, quite often I'm somebody that if we're putting an announcement out, I just want a kind of second pair of eyes over it. Usually my boss is to kind of go, is this right? I'm not going to stick this out. And somebody's then going to complain, or you're going to come back to me and kind of go, well, I wouldn't have said it that way. You know, I look for a little bit of reassurance in that respect. So it just, again, to anybody that's watching, you know, don't dwell on those weaknesses, own them, understand them. And remember that these are very, very generic tests as well. They are very good, but they also firstly say something slightly differently, and B, they are not representative purely of you. It's just an indicator, and own that and move forward with it. We are well over time today because this was an absolutely fantastic conversation. Really, really good, really different as well. So I think a lot of what we talk about on this podcast. So I'd really like to thank you, Amy, our very special guest today, Amy Rohan, for everything that you have shared today. I'm going to make sure we put the Culture Map book on because I think sounds like a really great resource for us to talk about. Do please, anybody watching or listening, connect with us on LinkedIn. Do please share any of the tests that you do. Do reach out to us and tell us what you've got. Start a conversation with us as well. We'd love to hear from you on that. And thank you to everybody watching today. Antonia and I will be back on the next episode of the Product Opscast. So thank you, everybody.